Hey, it's Francis, and we've had a tough day on Bitcoin and generally in cryptos as a whole. What's happened? Let's give you an update. Well, we were out most of the day, but generally it's a sea of red. It's a sea of red, and most coins have been losing against Bitcoin. So to be clear, by being in Bitcoin, you are in a better place than in most other coins. That doesn't feel like a great place right now. I can certainly understand, but you are maintaining your coin. The game in crypto is to build your Bitcoin valuation, because in the long run, Bitcoin will or should go up on balance of probabilities over the next 3, 4, 5 years. But it being highly volatile, it'll have days like this, and not once or twice, but fairly regularly. So with the possible exception of a Neo that had a little bit of a pop, and one or two minor moves there. This, of course, is Tether, which is the dollar. Most people should be down relative to the on the cryptos. So let's have a look, and I'm going to start with the ugliest of the charts for Bitcoin. That's the Tether Poloniex chart. So when you're analyzing our HVF setup and asking the question, is this going to fail, which it has certainly a bigger possibility of doing than it did when it was way up and making awesome progress at 4948. Was there clues? Yes. So just so that you know, while we were fairly optimistic on it, this is what I'd call very much a crypto setup. Very steep grinds from the low 1 to the low 2, and from the low 2 to the low 3. So these are typically in normal markets. We caution about that because we say they can pop and then later fizzle and run down, and in fact you can then end up with a head and shoulder, left shoulder, stroke head, and then it sells down somewhere here. It gets a bit of a rally up, and then you end up with a head and shoulder as well later point. So we warn against ascending, but in cryptos generally, given the wall of money that has been coming in, the ascending variety have often overperformed. In fact, not only have they made target, they've shot beyond. So we've been a little bit trained into bad form and saying perfectly acceptable because there's just so much buying through the pattern, but that buying will still be there. What happened is the buying popped, but then it went into slightly more grindy buying, first rising wedge over there, which is still fine because we know we can melt up out of the rising wedge, which is exactly what happened, into a steeper rising wedge. And then this is when it started to get ugly. Big smash down. Brutal sell-off. So I'll just move the now far more less hopeful P&L statement just to there, and we'll talk about what's happened. So why do I say this is the worst? We need to look at Bitcoin across all fiats and also across many exchanges. This is the most the lowest slung of the price behavior, and it's still highly volatile. So if we drop down a time frame to see what we've got here, you can see why I think certainly on Kraken and Poloniex we're likely to fail. So where there was previously good optimism about the Bitcoin, and I've been quite optimistic about that setup because we've seen those high rising doing just what they should do on many instances, and we can look at the bigger time frames and show you those, but maybe not this time. Remember, a pattern isn't obliged to give you the same outcome every time. You think it's the same, and in some small way there's something different in the water. So anyway, that was a horrific spill down there. That gave us a target into the funnel. That just missed being made on this inverted. That's good inverted structure, I'm afraid to say. So that's a continuation pattern for downside, which you would well expect after that sell-off. Rallied back up to previous level of significance in the same way that that wedge bounced on the roof of the previous wedge before throwing it down. This non-target performance, very close but not, rallies up and died in the funnel and has come very flat bottom low down and is now setting up for what I believe will be a run to the 4.2s. So I think there's scope for this evening more weakness in the cryptos, Bitcoin specifically, and this is key because on this particular platform this funnel will be run. On the Poloniex versus Tether, Bitcoin will get cheaper, and at the moment that target that is being implied is 4212. So where does it get any more slightly optimistic? Well, let's have a look. we have folk that are on Kraken exchange. It's also a big exchange. Look past that bad wick there. And I've intentionally put the euro in here. So we're getting dollar strength, a little bit of dollar strength. This is nowhere near the funnel level on this setup. So what I'm suggesting could occur is you could have the Polo Tether versus Bitcoin failing on the funnel, but you could survive and then later make target on something against one of the other fiats or even on one of the other exchanges. So we're looking at charts across all of them to see what's going on. This is kind of a falling wedge, high momentum, bit of a rally, squeezing, scope for more downside certainly. It wouldn't just go straight into basing out necessarily in there, but at some point maybe later a pop, calming, a little bit of a move up after squeezing, and then it'll either have a rest and then go up for target, or could still then double top or break down. So those are the scenarios on that, but it does seem possible in this instance that the pattern funnel setup holds, which means the 3,600 level on euro is not run. That said, it could also just spill out the bottom. If we just have the Polonex a minor just to target and then a strong rally here, this could be the bottom. It'll spoil that pattern, but that'll mean on the others that it'll just do potentially a small dip down and then they could survive. So it could be a question of some patterns winning and some patterns losing. So let's just have a look at the pound. So we've done the euro, and I'm also throwing in a third exchange here. This is Coinbase, a big gateway exchange. This had an extremely volatile sell-off and then an extremely volatile rebound, and we did actually draw that inverted structures target as well, and that is a huge wick that looks like it spans the better part of right the way from 3,750 pounds down to 3,498, so about 250 pound. That's your H3 right there, and that would be a low 2, low 3. So we'd shoot from down here. That has a target down here, also into the funnel, but you're further away at this point. This also, again, marginally lower low. That's why we've got this line in here. So that means we have traded a little bit lower than where we were before here, which is not a bad thing. It's rallied back into the funnel. That would have been this inverted funnel. It's all quite volatile, and it's got this grind line that points to another leg down. So I've got this target that's coming from here, and I'm saying where you're going to project from. If you're quite flat bottomed, we could be into the funnel here again. So you could sit these out, but these two patterns came quite shortly after each other, and this one's almost as big as that one. So that shows a little bit of a loss of momentum, a marginally lower low. This could fail, and this target could fail. We could have a little bit of a dip down, and you could bottom. So the pound looks better than the tether dollar on Polo. But in all cases, it's a brutal sell-off. But it's not extreme brutal, as you would have a look if you went out onto the bigger time frames, which might be something to do. Let's take the worst. Let's have a look at Bitcoin versus Kraken, by the way. So this is still dollar now, back to dollar, but this is the Kraken exchange. On the smaller time frame, again, marginally lower low here than that low. It could be the beginning of going a little bit lower and then fizzling on the downside and starting to recover. This is some way away from its $150 plus just from reaching the funnel, and a further $220 from actually spoiling this pattern. So I think the Kraken versus US dollar Bitcoin will actually survive this and potentially go on to make target. That said, as I say, it was a big sell-off, and we are having that, what I'd probably describe as a bit of a fizzle, which I'd put down to the steep grind line along the bottom of the pattern, as I've already mentioned. Those patterns can do that in the FX and the other markets. They don't always do it. Sometimes you just melt up and go all the way. In other words, that buying that was in the pattern, more of it arrives. So it's a sign of great strength. But it could also be too much buying gets done during this period, and then you lack the oomph to run all the way home to your geometric target. So potential to survive here, but still a bad day. No getting away from it. But Bitcoin has been the coin. For those that say, hey, but you were optimistic about Bitcoin and now it's gone down, it's been the coin to hold. If you were in anything else, you've lost more. So it is the coin to hold. The only place that you could have been where you would have done better would have been in Tether. If you look at coin market cap, you can see that. So as I was showing you, with the exception of NEO, which has been in a sell-off and downtrend for an extended period. So you would have been eating losses for a very long time. So just Tether would have done you better on any scale. Remember the liquidity of Bitcoin. You can't really entertain EOS and some of these other ones that are getting small market mover heroes in the same category, but you need to be able to get in and get out. So this is where we're at. Tough day at the office after a very, very good period of all-time highs, and you've got to accept it for what it is. It's the market, and it could have melted up and finished. So we have three outcomes with a squeezing wedge, which I was talking about. Let me just get that. Where was it? You have three outcomes. You have the melt up out the top, which we kind of had, and then you go all the way to target. You have the melt out the top and then a smash down, or you have the more compliant to traditional technical analysis, just straight from the rising wedge into a smash down. And I find quite often you get the final buyer's ramp, and then you get a smash down is common. And in very strong markets, you get this rising wedge, and then the buyers just panic buy it up, and you go all the way to target. So any of those three outcomes could have occurred, and in this case we got the pop out the top, and then we got the smash down, and now we have continuation patterns forming. I think now's not the time, in my view, for my holdings to panic sell. I think you'll end up regretting it. If you look at the bigger time frames, at the sales and what's gone on in Bitcoin, any time we've had periods of selling, whoops, this won't let me rescale, changing time frames, you've usually done, and it's not the equivalent of any of these moves, you've usually ended up recovering. That was a huge period of selling. This, for now, is one bad candle. Let's see. You've usually had a bit of a rally after the first sell-off. You've usually had a bit of a rally to get out on the second time. Here you sell off, you get a rally. Here you sold off, you get a rally. And on the previous points, when you sell off, you get a second chance to get out. So you can lighten up if you elect when it gets bullish, if you're feeling vulnerable at this point. But these are my take. This is my take. You have to do what you need to do. I can't advise you, but this is my take. I think the pattern will survive on, potentially has a chance of surviving with some of the crosses on some of the exchanges against some of the other fiats. I think the Poloniex USD Tether is very likely to fail, which is our worst looking chart, and I think it's forming a possible continuation here. Excuse me, tickle in the throat. If we have a bit of luck, you may get basing, but the fact that this did not make a lower low. So some things that are doing a bit better, but are not in the same scale. If you wanted to move out of Bitcoin into a little bit of Lisk, looks optimistic, could be a relative low 2 entry. Seems like it's basing out and holding up okay. Had a lovely little setup when that made its relative high 2 that we enjoyed. And Litecoin is right now out. It's already popping out of its falling wedge. When I drew this, it was just in a falling wedge. Litecoin is also showing some relative strength to Bitcoin as well. So those could be ones that, if you wanted to hide out, that could look in the future a little bit better than Bitcoin. But there's not many. So Lisk and Litecoin for reducing your exposure to Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is typically the least of faller, as you can see from the coin market cap. All these relative to Bitcoin have fallen further. Ethereum have fallen harder. Bitcoin Cash has fallen harder. All the big names, NEM, etc., have all fallen harder. So potentially Litecoin and Lisk for a little bit of spreading your risk, but otherwise sit it out in Bitcoin. Or if you're afraid and you're feeling it's at an emotional level, get into some Tether if you think it will continue. In terms of that Poloniex chart, I think that's your worst one, and I think we got a little bit more downside, but the patterns aren't getting bigger, They are roughly the same size. Once they're made, you might get different structure and strong rallies occurring. And on the others, I think the patterns could still survive in certain cases if you're lucky. That's it from Francis. Thank you very much. Enjoy, trade safe, trade small. Nothing I say is advice for you. It is just my take on how I may be managing my positions in terms of the markets at the moment, given this interesting test that we are facing. Trade small, trade